Today we're talking about the sign of Cancer, which always occurs from the first day of summer around June 21st or June 22nd until about July 22nd or July 23rd. It is one of the four power seasons of the year. It is one of the four seasons of the year, and it is particularly important because the sign of Cancer begins at the beginning of summer or the beginning of the birthing and growing and nurturing season. And it's important to use those words as description because the sign of Cancer is definitely known for its ability to nurture and grow and support and sustain life. It is probably, in terms of importance, one of the more important signs of the zodiac because without the sign of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, which rules mothering and nurturing, we really can't have life and we really can't have the sustaining of life. The sign of Cancer is ruled by the moon, and it's an interesting thing to watch the moon because the moon is the fastest body closest to the earth that we know of. And the moon takes about 28 and a half days to move through its cycle. It starts out as no moon or new moon when the moon is dark, supposedly, and slowly it grows into a crescent, which becomes the half circle, which is what we call the first quarter moon. A few days later, we see the full moon when the moon is at its fullest. A few days later, approximately a week later, we see the moon at a half circle again, which is last quarter. And then about a week later, it becomes the new moon. So it's about a 28 and a half day cycle. And it has a changing shape, or shall we say, a fluctuating shape. And the reason I say fluctuating is that the sign of Cancer is associated, especially if someone has not only the sun sign in Cancer, but many planets in Cancer or Cancer rising or a strongly placed moon in their horoscope, it would suggest that these particular persons are ruled by the moon and they too are fluctuating, that they have their moods. In fact, the word moody comes from the word moon. And so a person who has a lot of this in their horoscope will be viewed as being moody. I sometimes think of that as being a negative word. I don't think they're so moody as private, and that they have to have time to kind of go away and come back. People who have a lot of Cancer in their horoscopes are people that like to kind of go away and then come back with you and then go away and come back with you. The moon in ancient cultures was considered to be very important because it was always considered to be the ruler of Mother Earth or the ruler of birth or life-sustaining energies or forces. In the ancient cultures, if you look at various archaeological digs throughout the world, you would always find these big-bellied goddesses with large breasts, which represented Mother Earth or the cosmic mother or Gaia or the birthing process, and they were worshipped. It was a matriarchal culture long before it became a patriarchal culture, and so it was viewed as very important and very respected in the ancient cultures. The sign of Cancer is also an interesting sign, not just because it's important because it represents birthing and the sustaining of life, but that it takes a very, very long time when you're calculating a horoscope. It takes a much longer time for the sign of Cancer to pass through its 30 degrees than it does, for example, the sign of Aries. It's what we call a sign of long ascension. And so you will see many more possibilities for having Cancer rising in the world than you will having Aries rising. And for that reason, that's important because it does represent the importance of having life or the ability to give life or birth life. If we look at the moon again and its changing shape, it kind of looks like a container as it goes through its monthly cycle. And it does rule containers. The sign of Cancer rules containers, and the parts of the body that it rules are the parts of the body that act as containers for either life-giving substances or life-supporting substances. For example, the breasts, which hold the milk for the new child, the stomach, which holds the food which gives us life and keeps us going, the womb, which holds the child as it's being carried in its mother for 9 months. And so it's the sign of containers. And if you really want to extend that out, you will see this as being the sign of people who are in the food business or restaurant business. What is a restaurant? A container of people eating food. You will see a lot of people in the real estate business or the property business that have a lot of Cancer planets in the horoscope because they're working with containers of people again, but this time they're houses. If you look at the symbol for Cancer, the symbol for Cancer is the crab. And what does a crab do? He carries or she carries their house on their back, and they live in this container. So it's very much associated with containers and water and emotions and feelings. The sign of Cancer is a water sign. And this particular sign of the zodiac does have a tendency to carry a lot of water or require a lot of water to drink because it is a water sign, and water is considered to be the life-sustaining force of the earth. If we watch the moon each month as it rises to a full position, it affects the tides. There's been studies that have been done that the moon will pull and push the tides. And if you think about it, each individual is a container of mostly water. So why isn't it that we too would not be affected by the moon? Years and years ago, I used to talk to my insurance man on a regular basis, and he used to tell me that inevitably, whenever there was a full moon, there were more accidents on a full moon than there were at any other time. In the hospital, when I was having my daughter, they said there were always babies born more rapidly and more readily on the full moon than they are at any other time. In the asylums they've done, or mental institutions, they've done a lot of research, and they found that at the time of the full moon, people in the asylum are more reactive or more responsive. And that's an interesting concept in the fact that another word that's associated with the moon is luna, and the word lunacy comes from the word luna. And we're not suggesting here that cancers are crazy. They're not crazy, and they don't have mental dysfunctions. But they do have a tendency to go up and down like a yo-yo or like a roller coaster. And one thing you can always see with a cancer, or hear with a cancer, actually, is they have wonderful senses of humor. And they actually have this lunatic kind of laughter when they really get going and are laughing, almost like a bizarre sound from, for example, an old monster movie. I mean, they have this wonderful, wonderful laugh. They are also, I mentioned a little earlier, associated with the crab that walks along the beach. Now, let's really think about the crab that walks along the beach. The crab has basically two sides to it. One is a much more aggressive side, and another one is a much more retreating kind of side. And Cancer people tend to be this way. If you watch yourself and you go after the crab on the beach to try to grab it, it generally speaking will not fight back. It will generally speaking retreat first into its little house or its little shell, protecting itself. And that is true of Cancer personalities. If you aggressively go after them, there's more of an instinct to retreat rather than aggressively respond to you. However, if you also watch the crab on the beach, if they really are hungry and they're always looking for food, and it's very, very, very funny because Cancers are always looking for food or always hungry. If they decide they want something, they will go after it with that claw, that one big claw, and they will hang on to it with that claw, and that will be such a death grip, that claw, that the only way you can disengage it is to cut the claw off. So for this reason, Cancers are also known to be quite tenacious, especially in business. This is a group of people that are probably one of the most tenacious groups in terms of business, and oftentimes the most successful, and oftentimes the group, like the crab who collects things in his shell, who have an ability to be like pack rats or collect a lot of money in the bank or collect a lot of antiques or collect a lot of banks or collect a lot of things in their closet. This is the classic example of the husband or wife who absolutely refuses to get rid of that pair of slippers that they have had for 20 years because so-and-so gave it to them. Even though the slippers are dead and gone, they think they still have some use to them, so we should always keep them. You can always tell when you go to someone's house, a Cancer's house, and you look in their garage, because generally speaking, the garage will be loaded with all those things that they can find use for that they don't want to throw away. They have a hard time letting go of their collective kinds of memories. And it's also interesting because Cancer is associated with memory. The moon in astrology is associated with memory and habit. And there is a tendency for them to sometimes live in the past and really sometimes dwell too much on the past and not think too much about the future. This is one of the reasons we also find Cancers being very habitual. They like their favorite chair. They like their favorite slippers. We talked about that. They like their favorite meals. They have a certain way when they come home at night that they sort of get themselves all cozy and ready for the evening because they like to be comfortable. You can look in a Cancer's home and they always have these comfortable chairs and pillows and a lot of antiques. If it is the sign of memory and old things, Cancer is very much associated with antiques and old oak furniture. They're very fond of it. And if you see a lot of that in someone's home, generally speaking, if you look at the horoscope, there's going to be a strong feminine energy. And it would also suggest not only a strong feminine energy, but a strong Cancer energy. And It's also true if we're talking about the feminine and the moon and the ancient cultures. If you really look at the different cultures in the Jewish culture and the Jewish religious or holiday calendar, their calendar, quite contrary to the Roman calendar, which is based on more of a patriarchal system, their calendar is based on more of a matriarchal system. In other words, they were the first patriarchy, but this is all they had. This was the model that was there before. And all their holidays are based on the moon or the lunar cycle. And if you also look at that and you look at Cancer as being associated with food, a lot of holidays in general, which oftentimes are quite seasonal also, are associated with food. There's the Christmas dinner, there's the Passover dinner, and food is associated with the feminine and the moon. Again, with Cancers, food is a big thing. If you want to talk to them, if you want to reason with them, if you want to discuss things with them, always make sure they've eaten first, because if they haven't eaten first, they're going to be very difficult to talk to. One way they show love is by feeding you or taking you to dinner or lunch or breakfast or giving you wonderful things for your kitchen. It may not be the way you enjoy being shown love, but that's the best way that they have to show love. So we're looking at a sign that's very sensitive. We're looking at a sign that's very moody, that's very nurturing. It sounds like they would always be there for you. Generally speaking, they are. One of the difficulties with being a Cancer personality is not knowing when to set the limits with those particularly that you love. You see a lot, or you hear a lot these days about the word codependent. People who have a strong moon in the horoscope or who have a lot of Cancer planets in the horoscope may have a tendency to run in and rescue loved ones because they don't want them to get hurt or have a bad experience in the world. And as a result of that, they may not know how to set boundaries for themselves. It may suggest because they do care so much for the people they particularly love, especially their family. This is a very family-oriented group. Family is everything to them, generally speaking, unless you have some other things in the horoscope that might deter that possibility. Family is important. So if their family is hurting, they want to be there for their family. It's interesting, too, if you look at the days of the week. Monday is named after the moon because in the ancient cultures, they only could see 7 planets. The moon was included in that list. And each day was named after a planet. Sunday was named for the sun, a bright, shiny, easygoing day. Leo, sun rules Leo. But Monday, in our culture, which is the first day we go back to work, is the moon's day. And it's quite common when you go back to work at the beginning of the week that Monday is not exactly the most energetic day. Some people call it Blue Monday, time when we sort of retreat and sort of get our week organized and just sort of slowly start into the week. And so usually Mondays can be more of an emotional or private piece or part of the week. We've been talking a lot about the nurturing side of Cancer and about how that might be Earth Mother or the Cosmic Mother or Gaia, who is the ancient Mother Earth. But there's the other side. There's the other side, too, of Cancer, or the archetype of mother, which is the devouring mother. And I'm not suggesting by any means that any Cancers listening to this are devouring kinds of people, but life comes and life goes. Life is given and life is taken away. So there is that side. There is that negative side that can kind of crop up when, for example, the nurturing mother feels like it's giving too much. At some point, you have to have tough love or separate or cut back. And it may appear from the outside looking in that you move more into a devouring mother kind of stance. If we're talking about the word mother here, the mother and the experience with the early mother, lots of times when you deal with a Cancer, you talk with them, there are mother issues. They either might have been quite close to their mother, or they might have wanted to be desperately close to the mother, but the mother wasn't close to them. And so what they do is they become adults. They compensate for that early childhood experience of not having what they truly needed, being that they are ruled by the moon, which rules mothers, and they become a super mom or a super dad, because it can be that the Cancer men as well as Cancer women can be, sometimes Cancer men are more of a mother to their children than their wives might be. The physical characteristics of the sign of Cancer are quite common. They're pretty distinct. We have, first of all, usually a very round face, what we call the moon face. If we don't have the round face, usually you'll see the quite opposite of that, the bony, structured face with the craggy face, kind of like the crab in its shell. The skin will oftentimes have a luminescent kind of quality, a thin kind of almost like blue undertone. The laugh we talked about, Their walk will oftentimes be a little odd. It'll be a little bit on its side. They won't exactly walk directly towards you. It'll sort of be like this wobble as they walk towards you. One thing that's also distinct about if you have a lot of Cancer planets in the horoscope are their hands, because when they walk, you can generally see the hands as sometimes being attached to a little longer kind of arm, much like the crab on the beach. The eyes will oftentimes need glasses, because if you look at the crab, or a lobster for that matter, their eyes aren't that good. They're quite small and they're undeveloped, and lots of times Cancers might have a problem with their eyes or seeing, and so they're required at quite a young age to wear glasses. We talked about memory, and we talked about habit, and we talked about old feelings around the sign of Cancer, or old habits and old memories. And there's a lot of stories that are associated with the sign of Cancer. Many, many different stories that come from actually many, many different cultures, which does suggest that this is an archetype that has no real boundaries. It does cross throughout the entire world, and for that matter, throughout the entire solar system as we know it at this point. And one of the stories is actually an old Chinese story. It's about the woman whose name was Chang'e. And there's a lot of different versions of this story. And the story that I was taught was basically this version, that Chang'e was married to Chang'e, and he was a soldier, a well-known soldier, I believe, who had risen to a certain degree of power. And he had this secret pill of what we call immortality, that when his soldier cronies or his military cronies would come to the house, they would also all share a little bit of this pill or this elixir of immortality and be able to continue their life. And the wife, Chang'e, knew about this, and it wasn't really given to her to try. And one day when her husband was out of the house, she found it quite by accident, and she decided to try this elixir or this pill. And as soon as she put it upon her lips and took it in, she began to float and rise up and literally go through the ceiling of her house, out into the sky, out into the universe. And she had lost control. She couldn't come back to the earth. And slowly but surely, she found herself going towards the moon, where she eventually landed. And when she landed there, what happened is she vomited up what was remaining of the elixir, and out of her came the white rabbit, the rabbit that we always see in the moon. If you really look at the moon, it always looks like a rabbit that's sort of curved over, with the ears on the left and the tail on the right. And this rabbit then became the symbol, as rabbits are. Rabbits are one of the symbols for the feminine. And the reason the rabbits are the symbol for the feminine is, like the pig, they have multiple uteruses, so they can have several births going on at the same time in different locations of their body. What happened then is the husband comes home and realizes his wife is gone, and that the pill or the elixir is gone. And he's quite desperate, or there's a little bit left, and he's quite desperate, and he wants to find his wife. But he can't really reach her. He can only go to a certain point. And so, because the gods took pity upon them, he was allowed, because he still loved her, even though she had broken their trust, he still loved her. He was allowed to go see her once a year in the moon. She could never return to the earth, but he was allowed to go see her in the moon. And this is basically the story of how yin and yang developed, yang being the masculine principle and yin being the feminine principle, the balancing and how important it is. And what's also interesting about that story is that he not only can visit her once a year, but when he comes back, he's able to go through his life and be joyful that he's going to see her in a year. In fact, the way the story was told to me, the Milky Way, there was something about the Milky Way being the river that he took to get to the moon. And so that's one of the stories of the moon. And in fact, in the Chinese culture, in the fall, they always celebrate the festival of the moon with moon cakes. If you go into Chinatown in any major city, you'll see all kinds of wonderful moon cakes, which is very interesting, with usually an egg inside or two. And again, the egg is one of the symbols for birth and potential. Potential, literally, it's the sign of potential. And Cancer is, for that reason, the sign of potential. We see some other stories about the moon. First of all, we see another ancient Asian myth is Kuan Yin, who's the merciful and compassionate. Kind of like the Virgin Mary, actually. And actually, if you really want to think of an archetype, the Virgin Mary may be either associated with Virgo or the sign of Cancer, because she was the ultimate mother, at least in Christian belief systems. We also see the devouring mother coming from the point of, for example, India's Kali Ma, or Medusa, who was really not a mother, but she was rather devouring. Coming from a beautiful place, she became a rather devouring presence. In the Native American cultures, the moon is very highly regarded, and in fact, I don't know if it's currently in the tribes. I'm sure it still is in some of the tribes that keep their rituals together, but I know that in a lot of the old tribes, what used to happen is when a woman each month was still in her menses, each month when she would have her menses, she would go to what they called the visionary lodge, the moon lodge. And she was allowed to go there for as long as it took for her menses to be finished. And what would happen, the idea being that when she would go to the moon lodge, that this was the most holy time of the month for her, and out of this time came tremendous visions that the tribe could use for future growth. And after she would go and meditate or do whatever she did in the lodge with the other women, she would come back to the tribe and share the visions that she had had in the moon lodge. And as a result of sharing, the entire tribe would design a dance or a ritual around supporting that vision. So it was considered to be quite respectful and quite wonderful when a young girl became a woman. As the woman would mature and go through menopause and no longer have a monthly menses, then each I don't know when it was probably each month or each few weeks, they would go to what they called the grandmother lodge. And the grandmother lodge was extremely important. The grandmother lodge was actually, and if it still exists, still is, considered to be the power council for the tribe. In other words, they consider that when a woman goes through menopause, that the power stays inside of her. And the grandmother lodge is where the seat of women will sit and decide whether or not a chief should be a chief or certain things need to change, and basically be the decision makers for the tribe that are then implemented by the men in the tribe. And so it was considered to be a very, very holy, holy time. There's an old story, and actually this is not my story. This is a story from my friend Wendy Ashley, who's a wonderful, wonderful astrologer from Maine. And she's been working with Jungian analysts for about 25 years, and this is one of the stories that she shares with all of us about the moon. In the old skies, before we had the precession of equinoxes and Aries was really lined up with Aries, now it isn't, but it was then, the large dipper, the big bear, was lined up with the constellation Cancer, the mother bear. And the little dipper, baby bear, was lined up with the sign of Aries. And the way Wendy explains it is that if you look at a bear, a mother bear, basically a mother bear is the only one that raises her young. There is no father bear, because in fact, if a male bear comes around a young bear, they will usually kill it. And the first thing about a mother bear that's rather unique and interesting is that she can be inseminated with the sperm of the male bear, but not necessarily fertilize the egg until two things happen. Number one, she reaches a certain level of fat in her body. Second is that she finds a suitable place to hibernate so that she can be comfortable while she's going through the winter. And it's not until then that she's able to fertilize the egg. So basically, it's almost like self-fertilization. The second point she makes is that as the mother bear has her children and they grow, she's with them for quite a long time. She's with them for 2 years, in other words, 2 winters where she dens with them. And she's very loyal and devoted, much like a Cancer might be with their children. And what happens, though, is on the second winter, or about the 26th month usually, what happens is when they come out of the den, she quite suddenly will turn on her young and literally abandon them or shoo them up a tree, which is quite startling to the young because they're thinking, what's going on? You know, our mother was so good to us, now she's leaving us behind, and she leaves. She just leaves. And they say that a baby bear, when it's crying for its mother, is one of the most horrible, horrible sounds that you can hear. Now, she does that because she really has to become the devouring mother at this point so that they can become adults. Something that the animal kingdom has more of an awareness of than we do as humans. And in the old cultures, what used to occur is that the tribes that worship the bear would look for these abandoned, vulnerable baby bears and befriend them and bring them into the tribe and treat them like a pet and wait for them to become full-blown adult bears.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you like what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.